Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how some people collapse the moment you stop explaining yourself, stop reacting, stop chasing fairness? Today's topic is exactly about that silent moment. We're talking about what really happens when a narcissist finally meets empathic justice. Not revenge, not drama, but awareness. Inspired by the psychology of Carl Jung, this isn't about defeating anyone. It's about truth showing up uninvited. Most people think justice is loud. Jung knew something deeper. Justice becomes powerful when it's calm. When the empath steps back, something strange happens inside the narcissist's mind. Their mask starts slipping, their control weakens, and the chaos they avoided turns inward. And here's the part most people don't talk about. It's uncomfortable to watch, even when you've been hurt. If you've ever felt confused, guilty, or questioned yourself after standing your ground, stay with me till the end, because this might explain more than you expect. And while you're listening, don't just watch, participate. If something hits home, drop a comment. One honest line is enough. And if you want more psychology that feels like a real conversation, not a lecture, make sure you subscribe. Let's talk, not scroll. When we talk about the collapse of the false self, we are really talking about a moment most people never notice, but the narcissist feels it deeply. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to survive in the world, the version of ourselves shaped to gain approval, power, or safety. For narcissists, this persona isn't just a mask, it becomes their entire identity. It's polished, confident, superior, charming, and often convincing. But here's the truth most people miss. That false self can only exist as long as there is an audience willing to reflect it back. Empathic justice doesn't come with shouting, blaming, or trying to expose them. It comes quietly. It arrives the moment the empath stops explaining, stops reacting, stops feeding emotional energy. And that's when something inside the narcissist begins to crack. Because without validation, without admiration, without conflict even, the false self has nothing to hold it together. Imagine a stage actor performing with complete confidence until the lights go out and the audience leaves. The performance doesn't just end, it becomes meaningless. That's what happens internally. The narcissist may still look composed on the outside, but inside, confusion sets in, anxiety rises, anger appears without a clear target. They feel unseen, unimportant, even empty, and they don't always know why. This is not punishment, this is exposure. The empath didn't attack the narcissist's identity, they simply stopped confirming it. And when the mirror disappears, the narcissist is left alone with parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Self-doubt, shame, fear of being ordinary, fear of being unlovable without performance. This is why empathic justice feels so devastating to them. It removes the illusion without ever naming it. No arguments are needed, no revenge is required. Silence, boundaries, and emotional withdrawal do the work naturally. The false self begins to fracture because it was never rooted in authenticity, it was built on reaction. Jung believed that anything unconscious will eventually surface, and here it surfaces as insecurity. The narcissist may respond by seeking new sources of validation, escalating behavior, or trying to provoke a reaction, because any reaction feels better than none. Even anger reassures them that they still exist in someone else's emotional world. But when the empath remains grounded and unavailable, the narcissist's inner world grows louder. Their confidence starts feeling forced, their charm feels exhausting, and deep down, they sense the truth they fear most, that without control, without admiration, they don't know who they are. This is the collapse, Not dramatic, not public, not instant, but internal, slow, and deeply unsettling. For the empath, this moment often brings mixed emotions. There can be relief, guilt, sadness, even compassion. Because empathic justice doesn't feel like winning, it feels like stepping out of a cycle. But psychologically, it is powerful. It shifts the dynamic from external control to internal confrontation. The narcissist is no longer battling another person, they are facing themselves. And that is the one battle they cannot manipulate their way out of. Some may rebuild another mask, others may sink into bitterness. A rare few may choose self-reflection. Jung would say this is the crossroads between repetition and growth. The empath doesn't decide the outcome, they simply stop carrying the weight of someone else's illusion. And that is the deepest form of justice there is. Not destroying the false self, but letting it fall apart on its own, once the applause ends. When the shadow is no longer projected, something deeply uncomfortable begins to happen inside the narcissist's inner world. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the parts of ourselves we reject, our fears, insecurities, shame, envy, weakness, and unresolved pain. Carl Jung believed that the shadow doesn't disappear just because we deny it. Instead, it looks for somewhere else to live. For narcissists, projection becomes a survival strategy. Everything they cannot tolerate about themselves gets placed onto others. You are called selfish when they feel entitled. You are labeled cruel when they lack empathy. You are accused of being unstable when their inner world is chaotic. This projection isn't random, it's protective. As long as the shadow lives in someone else, the narcissist can maintain the illusion of superiority and control. But empathic justice begins the moment the empath refuses to carry what was never theirs. Not through confrontation, not through defense, but through quiet refusal. The empath stops explaining, stops absorbing blame, stops trying to prove their goodness, and suddenly the shadow has nowhere to go. This is when things shift. Without a willing container, the narcissist is forced to face emotions they have long avoided. Guilt without an excuse, anger without a target, shame without a victim. This experience feels threatening because it collapses their psychological defense system. Projection kept them regulated. It allowed them to externalize discomfort instead of processing it. When the empath steps out of that role, the narcissist may feel exposed, misunderstood, or unfairly treated, even though nothing overt has happened. That's the paradox of empathic justice. It feels cruel to the narcissist because it removes denial. They may escalate accusations, rewrite history, or provoke reactions in an attempt to offload the shadow again. Any emotional response feels like relief because it restores the familiar pattern. You hold what I cannot. But when the empath remains grounded, emotionally neutral, and boundaried, the projection fails. And when projection fails, self-awareness becomes unavoidable. This is not an awakening filled with clarity and growth. It's often messy, defensive, and painful. The narcissist may experience intense discomfort without language for it. They might feel restless, angry, empty, or misunderstood, yet unable to articulate why. This is the shadow knocking from the inside. Jung warned that what we refuse to confront within ourselves will appear in our lives as fate. In this context, empathic justice doesn't chase the narcissist, it simply stops running from the truth. The empath no longer argues against false accusations, no longer tries to be seen correctly, no longer absorbs emotional poison. That absence becomes a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous for those who survive on distortion. For the empath, this moment can feel strangely quiet, There's often relief mixed with grief, because refusing the shadow doesn't feel triumphant, it feels like letting go of a role you were never meant to play. Many empaths were conditioned to be emotional containers, to hold pain, to fix, to understand. Empathic justice is the moment they realize compassion doesn't mean self-erasure. By stepping away, they are not abandoning the narcissist, they are returning responsibility to its rightful owner. And that is what forces confrontation. The narcissist is left alone with internal contradictions they once managed by projection. Some will react with rage, some with withdrawal, some will seek new people to project onto, and a very small number may begin the painful work of self-reflection. Jung would say this is the beginning of shadow integration, but only if the individual is willing. The empath doesn't control the outcome. They don't punish. They don't diagnose. They simply stop participating in a lie. And when the shadow is no longer carried by another, it doesn't vanish. It demands recognition. This is why empathic justice is so powerful and so misunderstood. It isn't about making the narcissist suffer. It's about ending unconscious emotional labor. The shadow returns home where it always belonged. And whether the narcissist chooses growth or deeper denial is no longer the empath's burden to carry. Why do empathic boundaries feel like punishment to a narcissist, even when no harm is being done? From a Jungian perspective, the answer is surprisingly simple and deeply uncomfortable. Carl Jung believed that psychological health requires contact with truth, both inner and outer. Boundaries, when they are healthy, do exactly that. They don't accuse, explain, or attack. They quietly reflect reality as it is. And for someone who relies on control, distortion, and emotional influence to feel stable, that reflection can feel unbearable. A narcissist doesn't experience boundaries as neutral limits. They experience them as rejection, humiliation, or cruelty. Not because the boundary is harsh, but because it interrupts a system that once gave them power. For a long time, the empath may have been emotionally available, responsive, forgiving, and open. That openness became predictable. The narcissist learned which buttons to press, which emotions to trigger, which stories to tell in order to stay in control of the dynamic. When empathic boundaries appear, calmly, without drama, it feels like the rules have suddenly changed. There is no argument to win, no emotional reaction to manipulate, no guilt to activate, and that absence is destabilizing. Jung would say that boundaries function as mirrors. They show a person where they end and another begins. For a narcissist, that separation feels threatening because it exposes a truth they try to avoid. They cannot regulate their inner world without controlling someone else's. The empath's calm detachment becomes painful not because it is cold, but because it removes access. The narcissist may say, "You're being cruel," or "You've changed," or "You don't care anymore." What they are really expressing is loss of influence. Control once felt like connection, influence once felt like love, and when boundaries appear, that illusion collapses. Empathic justice lives right here. It doesn't humiliate the narcissist. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply refuses to participate in emotional chaos. The empath may still care, still feel compassion, but they no longer sacrifice their nervous system to prove it. Their tone becomes steady, their responses become brief, their energy becomes unavailable for drama. This is often when the narcissist escalates. They may test boundaries, provoke emotional reactions, or reinterpret the empath's calm as hostility. From their perspective, the empath's neutrality feels aggressive because it cannot be controlled. Jung understood that people resist truth most when it threatens their defenses. Boundaries strip away defenses gently but firmly. They say, without words, "I am responsible for myself, and you are responsible for yourself." That statement alone is enough to feel like punishment to someone who externalizes responsibility. The empath may feel conflicted during this phase. There can be guilt, second-guessing, and the fear of being unkind. This is because many empaths were taught that love means availability, endurance, and emotional labor. But empathic boundaries redefine love as respect for self and other. They allow the narcissist to experience the natural consequences of their behavior without interference. No rescuing, no over-explaining, no absorbing emotional fallout. And that's why this form of justice is so powerful. It doesn't argue with denial. It doesn't chase accountability. It simply stops cushioning reality. For the narcissist, this can feel like abandonment even when nothing has been taken away except access to control. They are left with their own emotions, reactions, and unmet needs, and that exposure is deeply uncomfortable. Some will react with anger, some with silence, some with attempts to regain influence, and a very small number may begin to reflect. Jung would say that boundaries create the conditions for individuation, the process of becoming a whole, separate self. The empath steps into their own center, and in doing so, invites the narcissist to do the same, whether they choose it or not. Empathic justice doesn't force growth, it allows truth. And truth, when it's no longer softened or negotiated away, can feel like punishment to those who built their identity on avoiding it. But in reality, it is simply reality being restored to its rightful place. The unseen power shift begins in a place most people underestimate: silence. Not the cold, punishing kind, but the calm absence of emotional reaction. In relationships shaped by narcissistic dynamics, power has rarely come from logic or strength, it has come from reaction. The narcissist learns early that emotions are leverage. Anger, guilt, fear, confusion, even compassion become tools to maintain dominance. As long as the other person reacts, explains, defends, or tries to be understood, the narcissist feels in control. This is why empathic justice looks nothing like revenge. Revenge is loud, it demands recognition, it keeps the emotional cord alive. Empathic justice, on the other hand, quietly removes the cord altogether. When the empath stops reacting, no arguing, no emotional defense, no visible hurt, the narcissist encounters something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling: indifference. This is not apathy, it is grounded neutrality, and that shift changes everything. From a psychological perspective inspired by Carl Jung, dominance depends on unconscious participation. As long as both people are emotionally entangled, the pattern continues. The narcissist expects resistance or submission, both of which confirm their influence. But indifference offers neither. It doesn't challenge their authority, yet it doesn't submit to it either. It simply steps outside the game. And when that happens, the narcissist's sense of power begins to wobble. They may still attempt to provoke, raising their voice, rewriting events, or suddenly playing the victim, because any reaction feels better than none. Emotional supply is not about positivity, it's about stimulation. Even negative attention reassures them that they still matter in someone else's inner world. Indifference cuts off that reassurance. It says without words, your emotional storms no longer define my reality. This reversal is destabilizing because it exposes a truth the narcissist works hard to avoid. Their dominance was never inherent, it was borrowed. It existed only because someone else was emotionally available to fuel it. When that fuel disappears, the structure weakens. The narcissist may experience restlessness, irritation, or a sudden sense of emptiness. They may accuse the empath of being cold, uncaring, or arrogant, because from their perspective, losing access feels like losing importance. But the empath hasn't taken power, they've reclaimed their own. This is why the shift often goes unnoticed by outsiders. There is no dramatic confrontation, no clear winner, just a quiet rebalancing. The empath's nervous system begins to calm. Their responses become measured. Their energy turns inward instead of outward. And that internal stability becomes the new source of power. Jung understood that real power comes from individuation, the ability to stand as a whole self, not dependent on approval or control. When the empath reaches this state, the narcissist's strategies lose effectiveness. Manipulation needs emotional hooks. Indifference offers none. This doesn't mean the narcissist immediately collapses or changes. Often, they escalate before they retreat. They may test boundaries repeatedly, searching for cracks, but over time, the lack of response teaches them something uncomfortable. They are no longer the center of the emotional universe, and that realization can feel like loss. For the empath, this phase can feel strange. There may be moments of doubt, wondering if they are being too detached or unkind. But empathic justice is not about cruelty, it is about alignment. The empath is no longer reacting from fear, guilt, or obligation. They are responding, when necessary, from clarity. That difference is subtle but profound. The unseen power shift doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply changes the emotional gravity of the relationship. The narcissist feels it because their influence no longer lands. Their words no longer provoke. Their presence no longer controls the emotional weather. And in that quiet space, the truth becomes unavoidable. Dominance built on emotional dependence cannot survive emotional independence. This is why empathic justice is so effective. It doesn't seek to overpower, it removes participation. And when one person steps out of the cycle, the entire dynamic must either transform or dissolve. The power was never in the reaction, it was in the choice to stop reacting. Individuation versus psychological regression is the quiet crossroads where empathic justice ultimately leads, and it is here that the difference between growth and collapse becomes most visible. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, integrating the conscious and unconscious, accepting both strengths and flaws, and developing a stable sense of self that does not depend on control or approval. For the empath, this process often begins after prolonged emotional exhaustion. They have spent years over-explaining, fixing, absorbing blame, and carrying emotional weight that was never theirs. When empathic justice enters the picture, through boundaries, detachment, and self-respect, the empath slowly turns inward. Their focus shifts from managing another person's emotions to understanding their own. This is not selfishness. It is psychological maturation. The empath begins to recognize patterns, trust their perceptions, and ground their identity in values rather than reactions. This movement toward wholeness feels stabilizing. There is less chaos, fewer emotional spikes, and a growing sense of inner authority. At the same time, something very different is happening on the other side of the dynamic. For the narcissist, the loss of emotional control often triggers regression. Regression, in Jungian terms, is a retreat into earlier psychological defenses when reality becomes too threatening. Instead of reflecting, integrating, or adapting, the narcissist may double down on denial, blame, and projection. Their emotional responses may become more childlike, tantrums, sulking, rage, or withdrawal, because those strategies once worked. The empath's growth exposes a painful truth. The narcissist's identity was built around external regulation. When that regulation disappears, they are left without the skills needed for self-reflection. This is why empathic justice feels like abandonment to them, even though no cruelty has occurred. The empath is individuating, standing as a separate, grounded self, while the narcissist feels increasingly fragmented. Jung would say this moment is decisive. It is the psychological fork in the road. Faced with the collapse of old defenses, a person can either turn inward with honesty or retreat further into illusion. Individuation requires humility. It demands the willingness to see one's shadow, accept responsibility, and tolerate discomfort without externalizing it. For many narcissists, this step feels unbearable because it threatens the grandiose self they depend on for emotional survival. Instead of integrating, they may regress, seeking new sources of validation, rewriting narratives, or positioning themselves as victims to restore a sense of control. Meanwhile, the empath's nervous system begins to recalibrate. Their emotions feel less hijacked, their thoughts become clearer. They stop questioning their reality because they are no longer constantly being contradicted. This internal alignment strengthens them, not through dominance, but through coherence. Jung believed that individuation does not make a person superior, it makes them more real, and reality is stabilizing. This contrast creates a widening psychological gap. The empath becomes more present, more contained, more self-directed. The narcissist, unless they choose reflection, becomes more reactive, more rigid, more dependent on external affirmation. This is not because the empath is doing something to them, but because growth and avoidance move in opposite directions. Empathic justice does not force regression, it simply removes the scaffolding that once hid it. In rare cases, this moment becomes transformative for the narcissist. If they are able to tolerate the discomfort and look inward, they may begin the difficult work of self-examination. Jung would call this the beginning of integration, where the shadow is acknowledged rather than projected, and responsibility is reclaimed. But this requires sustained effort and honesty, not performance. More often, regression feels safer. It preserves the illusion, even at the cost of deeper fragmentation. For the empath, witnessing this divergence can be painful. There may be sadness, grief, or the urge to rescue. But individuation means resisting that pull. It means allowing others to face the consequences of their inner world without interference. This is the final form of empathic justice. Not separation fueled by anger, but separation grounded in truth. One person moves toward wholeness, the other chooses either reflection or retreat. And Jung would argue that this choice, made quietly, without drama, determines whether the psyche evolves or repeats itself. Empathic justice does not decide the outcome, it reveals the path.